The phone rang at exactly 12:47 a.m., cutting through the silence like a blade through paper. I know the exact time because I was lying there staring at the digital clock, wondering when sleep would finally come. The green numbers had been mocking me for the past hour, counting down the minutes until another restless night became another exhausting day. Jennifer stirred beside me, her hand fumbling across the nightstand. The landline. Who even calls the landline anymore? Everyone we knew had our cell numbers. Everyone except work emergencies, telemarketers, and apparently, people who didn't want their calls traced back to personal devices. Hello? Her voice was thick with manufactured sleep, the kind of groggy tone you put on when you want the caller to know they've woken you up. But I'd been watching her for the past 20 minutes, and she hadn't been sleeping either. She'd been lying there just as awake as I was, her breathing too controlled, too measured. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, just a low murmur that made Jennifer sit up straighter in bed. Her posture changed completely, spine rigid, shoulders tense. The sleepy act vanished. "Hold on," she whispered into the receiver, then slipped out of bed with practiced silence. My wife of 16 years, the mother of my 2 daughters, padded across our bedroom floor and disappeared into the master bathroom. The door clicked shut behind her, followed immediately by the sound of running water. The faucet turned on full blast, a white noise machine to mask whatever conversation was about to happen. 16 years of marriage teaches you things about a person. I knew Jennifer's habits, her patterns, her tells. She ran water when she was hiding something. She'd done it when she was planning surprise birthday parties for the girls. She'd done it when she was coordinating Christmas presents with her sister. She'd done it when she was talking to her mother about my job prospects during the recession. But this felt different. This felt wrong. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The house we'd bought 12 years ago creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that usually brought comfort. Tonight, they felt like accusations. Even the house knew something was off. The bathroom door was solid oak, one of the upgrades we'd splurged on during the renovation 3 years ago. Jennifer had insisted on quality doors throughout the house. "Privacy matters," she'd said. "Everyone deserves their own space." At the time, I'd thought she was being considerate of the girls as they got older. Now I wondered if she'd been planning ahead for moments like this. I pressed my ear against the cool wood, but the running water made it impossible to hear clearly. Just fragments of whispered conversation, her voice urgent and low. I caught a few words. "Tomorrow. Can't wait. Worried about." But nothing coherent enough to understand the context. That's when I remembered my phone. The iPhone was still plugged into its charger on my nightstand. I grabbed it, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The voice memo app opened with a single tap. I'd used it countless times for work, recording notes about restoration projects at my classic car shop. Customers loved hearing the technical details about their vehicles, and I'd found that audio notes were more thorough than written ones. I pressed record and held the phone against the bathroom door. The oak that had seemed so solid suddenly felt thin as paper. Jennifer's voice came through clearly now, the phone's microphone picking up vibrations through the wood that my ear had missed. "I know it's late, Victor, but I couldn't stop thinking about this afternoon." Her voice was soft, intimate, in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. The way you looked at me when Patricia left the conference room. I could barely concentrate on the rest of the meeting. Victor Shaw, senior partner at Hartwell, Shaw and Associates, the law firm where Jennifer had worked for the past 8 years. I'd met him at office parties, shaken his hand at the company picnic, made small talk about sports and weather. He was in his early 50s, silver-haired and confident, the kind of man who wore expensive suits and drove a Tesla. He'd always been polite to me, professional. I'd never suspected. How could I have been so naive? "Tomorrow's going to be torture," Jennifer continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Sitting in that boardroom, pretending to focus on depositions, while all I can think about is your hands on me, the way you taste, the way you make me feel. My stomach clenched, the phone trembled in my grip, but I kept it pressed against the door. I needed to hear this. All of it. "I know we have to be careful," she said, "but maybe we could meet at the apartment after the Henderson case review. I could tell David I'm working late on research. He never questions the long hours anymore. I don't think he even notices when I'm gone." David. That was me. She was talking about me like I was some oblivious stranger, some inconvenient obstacle to work around. 16 years of marriage, 2 children, a life built together, and I'd become nothing more than an alibi. "The girls have soccer practice until 6, so we'd have at least 2 hours before I need to be home for dinner," Jennifer continued. "God, Victor, I need you. I need to feel alive again. You make me feel like myself, like the woman I used to be before." "Before what? Before me? Before our marriage? Before our family?" "I love you too," she whispered, and those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. I know this is complicated, but what we have is real. More real than anything I've felt in years. The conversation continued for another few minutes, making plans, sharing intimate details that felt like daggers in my chest. I recorded every word, my phone capturing evidence of the betrayal that was destroying my world in real time. When the water finally stopped running, I slipped back to bed, phone clutched in my hand. Jennifer emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later, moving quietly across the room. She slid back under the covers, her body carefully positioned to avoid touching mine. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Just work stuff," she replied, the lie smooth and practiced. "Client emergency. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I knew exactly how it was now. I lay there for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, listening to Jennifer's breathing gradually slow into genuine sleep. She could rest easy now that she'd made her plans. Me? I had some planning of my own to do. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood perfectly. I'd managed maybe an hour of sleep, but adrenaline and determination kept me alert. Jennifer went through her usual morning routine: shower, coffee, quick breakfast, while scrolling through emails on her phone. She kissed my cheek before leaving for work, the same perfunctory gesture she'd performed 1,000 times before. Now it felt like betrayal. "Working late tonight," she said, grabbing her keys. "The Henderson case is heating up." "Of course it is," I replied. She paused at the door, something in my tone making her look back. "You okay? You seem off." "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." "Maybe you should see someone about that. Insomnia can be serious." The concern in her voice sounded genuine, which somehow made everything worse. How could she compartmentalize so completely? How could she plan an affair 1 minute and worry about my sleep the next? The contradiction made my head spin. It was as if she could switch roles effortlessly: devoted wife, caring partner, secret lover, without any visible strain. I wondered how long she'd been practicing that skill, how many small lies had paved the way for the bigger ones. "I'll be fine," I said. "Have a good day at work." She smiled, leaned in to kiss my cheek, and grabbed her keys. The door closed behind her with its usual soft click, a sound I'd heard thousands of times before. This time, it felt final, like the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I hadn't realized we were finishing. After she left, I sat in our kitchen with my coffee and my phone, staring at the voice memo from the night before. 43 minutes and 17 seconds of my marriage ending. The file name was generic, meaningless, something my phone had auto-generated, but I knew exactly what it contained. I'd listened to it 3 times already, each replay revealing new details, new betrayals, New moments where I realized just how little of my life had been real. The apartment she'd mentioned. When had they gotten an apartment? The casual way she'd referred to it suggested familiarity, routine. Not a spur-of-the-moment decision, not some reckless fling. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? The way she talked about me, about our life together, suggested this wasn't a recent development. This had been building for months, maybe years, quietly, methodically, while I went on believing we were solid. I thought about confronting her immediately, playing the recording and demanding explanations. I imagined the look on her face, the rush of words, the excuses, the counterattacks. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was strategy. Jennifer was a lawyer, trained in argument and negotiation. If I came at her directly, she'd find ways to minimize, deflect, turn it back on me. She'd reframe the conversation until I was defending myself instead of asking questions. She'd make me the villain for violating her privacy, for recording her without consent, for not trusting her. No, this required a different approach. That's when I remembered. Her parents were coming to visit this weekend. Robert and Susan Mitchell, pillars of their community back in Connecticut. Conservative, religious, old-fashioned people who still believed in the sanctity of marriage and family values. The kind of people who didn't tolerate excuses when it came to vows and promises. They'd raised Jennifer with those same values, or so I'd thought. Somewhere along the way, something had clearly gone wrong. They were driving down Saturday morning for Beth's soccer tournament. Jennifer had been planning a big family breakfast, one of those elaborate spreads she put together when she wanted to impress her parents. Fresh flowers, homemade biscuits, the good china, a perfect family tableau, carefully staged to present a life that no longer existed. It would be a shame to ruin such a lovely scene. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, autumn in New England at its finest. The maple trees in our yard were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, and there was just enough chill in the air to make the warm kitchen feel cozy and inviting. The kind of morning that belonged on a postcard or in one of Susan's photo albums. Jennifer had been up since 6, preparing her feast. The dining room table was set with her grandmother's china, the same pattern we'd used for our wedding reception. Fresh flowers from the farmer's market sat in a crystal vase, arranged just so, and the smell of baking biscuits filled the house. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, humming softly, every gesture confident. "They should be here any minute," Jennifer said, checking her appearance in the hallway mirror. She looked beautiful, as always. 42 years old and still turning heads, still the woman I'd fallen in love with in college. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I recognized only by appearance, not by truth. "Everything looks perfect," I said, and meant it. Jennifer had always been good at creating the illusion of perfection. She believed in surfaces, in presentation, in what things looked like from the outside. Robert and Susan arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, punctual as always. Hugs and greetings, compliments on the house, questions about the girls. Beth and Jamie were still upstairs getting ready for the tournament, so it was just the 4 of us around the breakfast table. The intimacy of it made my chest tighten. "This looks wonderful, honey," Susan said, admiring the spread. "You always go to such trouble." "It's no trouble at all," Jennifer replied, pouring fresh orange juice. "Family is everything, right? Family is everything." The irony was almost too much to bear. We made small talk while we ate. Robert's retirement plans, Susan's book club, updates on Jennifer's siblings, normal family conversation, the kind we'd shared hundreds of times over the years. I played my part, asked appropriate questions, laughed at Robert's jokes, nodded in the right places. But all the while my phone sat in my pocket, waiting. I could feel its weight, like a physical reminder of what was coming. "David, you're quiet this morning," Susan observed. "Everything all right at the shop?" "Business is good," I said. "Actually, there's something I want to share with everyone. Something I think you should all hear." Jennifer looked up from her eggs, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "What kind of something?" I pulled out my phone, my movements deliberate and calm, as if I were simply reaching for the salt. "Just something interesting I came across. I think it'll give everyone a new perspective on family values." "David," Jennifer's voice carried a warning note, low and urgent, but she couldn't know what I had. Not yet. I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker we kept on the kitchen counter, the one we used for dinner party music and holiday playlists. The connection chimed, sharp and unmistakable, and suddenly the room felt charged with potential energy. "I want you all to hear something," I said, my finger hovering over the play button. "Something that happened in our house 2 nights ago." Jennifer's face went pale. She knew. Somehow, she knew. "David, don't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it was too late. I pressed play. The sound of running water filled the kitchen, followed by Jennifer's voice, intimate and urgent. "I know it's late, Victor, but I couldn't stop thinking about this afternoon." Susan's orange juice glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate. Robert's fork clattered to the table. Jennifer's face drained of all color. The recording continued, every damning word crystal clear through the kitchen speakers. Jennifer's voice describing her affair, making plans, expressing love for another man. Her parents sat frozen, horror and disbelief warring on their faces. "The way you looked at me when Patricia left the conference room, I could barely concentrate on the rest of the meeting." Susan made a small, wounded sound, like an animal in pain. She recognized her daughter's voice immediately, of course. A mother always knows. "Tomorrow's going to be torture. Sitting in that boardroom, pretending to focus on depositions, while all I can think about is your hands on me. The way you taste, the way you make me feel." Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. His face was stone, his jaw clenched tight. He looked at Jennifer with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in 10 seconds. "I could tell David I'm working late on research. He never questions the long hours anymore. I don't think he even notices when I'm gone." That line hit exactly as I'd known it would. Susan's hand flew to her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. She'd raised Jennifer to be better than this, to honor her commitments, to respect her family. This recording was destroying everything she thought she knew about her daughter. "The girls have soccer practice until 6, so we'd have at least 2 hours before I need to be home for dinner." Using our children as alibis for adultery. Even I hadn't fully processed that detail until hearing it again in front of her parents. "God, Victor, I need you. I need to feel alive again. You make me feel like myself, like the woman I used to be before. Before us. Before this family. Before the life we'd built together. I love you too. I know this is complicated, but what we have is real. More real than anything I've felt in years." The recording ended. The kitchen fell into absolute silence except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece and Susan's quiet crying. Jennifer sat motionless, her breakfast untouched, staring at her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Robert was the first to move. He stood slowly, deliberately, like a man carrying an enormous weight. He looked at Jennifer for a long moment, then at me, then back at his daughter. "We're leaving," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Daddy, please," Jennifer whispered, the first word she'd spoken since the recording began. "Now, Susan," Robert said, helping his wife to her feet. "We're leaving now." Susan looked at Jennifer with eyes full of pain and disappointment. "How could you?" she whispered. "How could you do this to your family?" Jennifer had no answer. What answer could there be? They gathered their things quickly, efficiently, like people fleeing a disaster. Susan's hands shook as she collected her purse. Robert moved with grim determination. a man who'd seen enough. At the front door, Susan turned back one last time. "Those beautiful girls upstairs," she said, her voice breaking. "What about Beth and Jamie?" "Mom, please," Jennifer said, tears finally coming. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" Susan asked. "Explain how you threw away everything good in your life? Explain how you betrayed a man who loves you and children who adore you? Explain how you became someone I don't recognize?" She didn't wait for an answer. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like finality. Jennifer and I sat alone in the wreckage of our perfect family breakfast. The biscuits were getting cold. The flowers still looked beautiful in their crystal vase. The grandmother's china would need to be cleared away, washed, put back in the cabinet where it would wait for the next special occasion that might never come. "How long have you known?" Jennifer asked finally. 2 days, I said. "Since Victor called our house at midnight and you ran to whisper sweet nothings in the bathroom." She flinched at the sarcasm in my voice. "David, Don't," I said, standing up from the table. "Just don't." I walked upstairs to our bedroom, pulled my already packed suitcase from the closet, and headed for the door. I'd packed it the night I made the recording, knowing this moment would come, knowing I'd need to leave quickly and cleanly. "Where are you going?" Jennifer called after me. "Away from here," I said. "Away from you." "What about the girls? What about Beth's tournament?" I paused at the front door. "I'll be at the tournament. I'll always be there for Beth and Jamie. But I won't be here. Not anymore. David, please, we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No," I said, turning to face her one last time. "We can't. Some things can't be fixed, Jennifer. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some recordings can't be unheard." I left her standing in the doorway of our house, surrounded by the ruins of the perfect life she'd destroyed for a few hours of feeling alive with Victor Shaw. The recording had done exactly what I'd hoped it would do. It had revealed the truth in a way that couldn't be denied, minimized, or explained away. It had shown Jennifer's parents exactly who their daughter had become. It had ended our marriage with the clarity and finality that 16 years deserved. But as I drove away from the house where I'd planned to grow old with Jennifer, I realized this was just the beginning. The recording was evidence, but it wasn't justice. It wasn't enough. Victor Shaw was still out there, still destroying families, still thinking he could take whatever he wanted without consequences. Jennifer's law firm still employed them both, still enabled their affair, still pretended that professional ethics meant something. The recording had ended my marriage, but it hadn't ended my story. That would require a different kind of strategy altogether. The Riverside Motel wasn't exactly the Four Seasons, but it had two things I needed: cheap weekly rates and no questions asked. The room smelled like disinfectant and old cigarettes, and the air conditioning unit rattled like it was plotting its own demise, but it was mine. For the first time in 2 days, I had space to think. I'd spent Saturday afternoon at Beth's soccer tournament, cheering from the sidelines like nothing had changed. The girls didn't know yet. Jennifer had told them I was working on a big restoration project that required early mornings and late nights. It wasn't entirely untrue. I was working on a restoration project, just not the kind they imagined. Beth scored 2 goals, and Jamie cheered from the bench with the kind of enthusiasm only 9-year-olds could muster. Normal family moments that felt surreal after the morning's destruction. Jennifer sat on the opposite side of the field, her sunglasses hiding red-rimmed eyes. We didn't speak. Now, Sunday evening, I sat on the motel bed with my laptop and a yellow legal pad, planning my next move. The recording had been the opening salvo, but wars weren't won with single battles. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner, Mike Torres. "Shop's covered tomorrow. Take whatever time you need, brother." Mike had been my partner at Classic Restoration for 5 years, ever since he'd bought into the business with his military disability settlement. Former Marine, steady hands, good with customers. He knew something was wrong without needing details. I texted back, "Thanks. Might need a few days to sort things out. Whatever you need, we've got your back." That's what real loyalty looked like, not whispered promises to other men in bathroom conversations. I opened my laptop and started researching. If you're going to take down a law firm's senior partner, you need to understand the battlefield. Hartwell, Shaw and Associates had been in business for 32 years, built a reputation on corporate law and high-profile divorce cases. Victor Shaw had joined as a junior associate in 1998 and made partner in 2005. Married to Catherine Shaw, 2 adult children, member of the country club, regular donor to local charities, the perfect facade of respectability. But facades always had cracks if you knew where to look. I started with public records, property ownership, business filings, court cases. Victor's name appeared on dozens of documents, but one address kept showing up that didn't match his listed home address, a condo in Harbor Towers, the expensive high-rise downtown. Purchased 18 months ago under Shaw Holdings LLC. 18 months. That gave me a timeline for when this affair had moved from office flirtation to rented love nest. The condo was Unit 847, 8th floor, Harbor View. I found the building's website, browsed the amenities. Concierge service, private parking, discreet entrance from the parking garage. Perfect for conducting affairs without nosy neighbors or inconvenient witnesses. My phone rang. Jennifer's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message. "David, please call me back. We need to talk about the girls. About what happens next. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But we can't leave things like this." She was right about one thing. We did need to talk about Beth and Jamie. But everything else could wait until I was ready. Monday morning, I drove past the law firm's building on my way to the shop. 23 floors of glass and steel, Hartwell, Shaw and Associates occupying the top 5 floors. I parked across the street and watched the morning routine. Lawyers and paralegals flowing in and out, coffee shops doing brisk business, the machinery of justice grinding forward. At 8:47 a.m., Victor Shaw's silver Tesla pulled into the parking garage. Right on schedule, according to the pattern I'd observed over the past 3 days. Creatures of habit, these successful people. It made them predictable. The shop was busy when I arrived, which was good for my mental state. Nothing like the honest work of restoring classic cars to clear your head and focus your thoughts. We had a 1967 Mustang convertible that needed a complete engine rebuild, and a 1973 Camaro with electrical issues that had been driving its owner crazy for months. "You look terrible," Mike said when I walked into the office. "When's the last time you slept?" "Sleep is overrated," I said, pouring coffee from the perpetually brewing pot we kept in the corner. "How's the Mustang coming?" "Don't change the subject. What's going on, David? And don't tell me it's nothing. I've known you too long." Mike had a way of cutting through nonsense, probably a military thing. I gave him the basic facts. Jennifer's affair, the recording, the breakfast scene with her parents. I left out my plans for Victor Shaw. Some things were better kept private. "Jesus," Mike said when I finished. 16 years and she throws it away for some lawyer? Apparently. What are you going to do? Right now, fix cars. Everything else can wait. But everything else couldn't wait. Not really. By lunchtime, I'd made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire plan. I was going to visit Catherine Shaw. Victor's wife deserved to know what her husband was doing with his Harbor Towers love nest. She deserved to hear the recording that had destroyed my breakfast table. She deserved the truth, even if the truth was going to destroy her world the same way it had destroyed mine. The Shaw residence was in Millbrook Heights, the kind of neighborhood where the houses sat on 2-acre lots and the mailboxes cost more than most people's cars. I found the address easily enough. A colonial revival with perfect landscaping and a circular driveway. Catherine Shaw's BMW sat in front of the 3-car garage. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, gathering courage. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Not exactly. This was about justice, about making sure the consequences of Victor's choices extended beyond my marriage. Catherine Shaw answered the door herself, no housekeeper or staff. She was attractive in the way wealthy women in their 40s often were, well-maintained, expertly styled, probably spent more on skincare than I made in a month. She looked puzzled to find a stranger on her doorstep. "Mrs. Shaw? My name is David Mitchell. I think we need to talk about your husband." Her expression shifted immediately, wariness replacing confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." "Victor Shaw, senior partner at Hartwell, Shaw and Associates. Your husband. I have information I think you'd want to hear." She studied my face, probably trying to determine if I was dangerous or just crazy. "What kind of information?" "The kind that explains why he bought a condo at Harbor Towers 18 months ago and why he's been meeting my wife there twice a week." The color drained from her face, but her composure remained intact. Lawyer's wife, probably used to handling difficult conversations. "I think you should come inside," she said. Catherine Shaw's living room looked like something from a magazine. Expensive furniture arranged with mathematical precision, fresh flowers in crystal vases, not a single item out of place. The room didn't feel lived in so much as curated, as if comfort had been deliberately sacrificed for control. She offered me coffee, which I declined out of habit more than preference, then sat across from me in a wingback chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her posture was flawless, spine straight, hands folded loosely in her lap, the posture of someone who had spent years mastering the art of composure. "Tell me what you know," she said. There was no preamble, no small talk, no emotional easing into the conversation. It was a request delivered with the calm authority of someone used to receiving answers. I told her everything. The midnight phone call that had started unraveling my certainty. The hushed bathroom conversation where I first realized Jennifer wasn't being careful anymore. The recording. How accidental it had been at first. How deliberate it became when I realized what I was hearing. The breakfast scene with Jennifer's parents. The look on her mother's face when the truth became unavoidable. The way the room had gone silent when denial finally ran out of places to hide. I played her selected portions of the audio file, not all of it, just the parts that made Victor's involvement undeniably clear. The moments where there was no ambiguity, no plausible explanation, no room for interpretation. She listened without interruption, her face a mask of controlled emotion that barely shifted even when Victor's voice filled the room. No gasps, no sharp intakes of breath, just stillness. When I finished, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she sat in silence for several minutes, staring out the window at her perfectly manicured garden, as if the symmetry outside might somehow counterbalance the chaos that had just been confirmed inside her life. "How long have you suspected?" I asked finally, the quiet starting to feel heavy. "Months," she said at last. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it had changed. Little things that didn't add up, late meetings that weren't on his calendar. New cologne. He started going to the gym regularly, bought new clothes. Classic midlife crisis behavior, but I convinced myself it was just adjustment. Getting older, trying to feel young again. She let out a small, humorless breath. "It's amazing what you can rationalize when the alternative is admitting your marriage is a lie." "The condo at Harbor Towers?" "He told me it was an investment property." Her mouth tightened slightly. "Said the firm was considering expanding their downtown presence, maybe opening a satellite office. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than questioning everything we'd built." She stood and walked to the window, her back to me, shoulders squared like she was bracing against an invisible impact. 22 years of marriage, 2 children in college, a life built together, and he throws it away for, what, a younger woman? The thrill of something new? There was no anger in her voice now, just disbelief and something dangerously close to grief. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. The words felt insufficient, but they were all I had. "Are you?" she asked, turning back to me. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. "Sorry, I mean. Or are you here because you want something from me?" The question caught me off guard with its directness, but not with hostility. It was the question of someone who had already learned that kindness often came with conditions. "I want Victor to face consequences for what he's done, to both our families." "And what consequences did you have in mind?" I hadn't expected her to be so open, so immediately strategic. But then again, she'd been married to a lawyer for 22 years. She understood leverage. She understood outcomes. "His reputation," I said. "His career, his comfortable life. He destroyed my marriage and yours. Why should he get to continue like nothing happened?" Catherine Shaw smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of someone who had already crossed an internal line. "You know, David, I think we might be able to help each other." Over the next hour, she told me things about Victor that I never could have discovered on my own. His gambling problem, carefully hidden but meticulously documented in financial records she'd been quietly tracking for months. His pattern of inappropriate relationships with younger female colleagues, not just a one-time lapse, but a recurring behavior going back years. The firm's recent financial troubles, masked by creative accounting practices that wouldn't survive even a moderately curious audit. "Victor thinks he's untouchable," she said. "Senior partner, respected member of the community, all the right connections, but he's gotten careless, arrogant, and arrogant men make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that can destroy careers, the kind that can bring down law firms, the kind that can turn respected community leaders into cautionary tales." She walked to an antique secretary desk in the corner of the room, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a thick manila folder. The motion was practiced, as if she'd rehearsed this moment more than once. "Financial records," she explained. "Bank statements, credit card bills, property documents, everything related to his extracurricular activities. I've been documenting his behavior for months, just in case." "In case of what?" "In case I decided to leave him. Divorce is expensive, David, especially when you're married to a lawyer. You need leverage. You need evidence. You need ammunition." She handed me the folder. The weight of it felt symbolic as much as physical. "Consider this a gift from one betrayed spouse to another." I opened the folder and scanned the contents. Bank transfers to Harbor Towers Property Management. Credit card charges at expensive restaurants on days when Victor had told Catherine he was working late. Hotel receipts from business trips that weren't on the firm's calendar. A paper trail of deception going back over a year, detailed enough to remove any doubt about intent. "This is incredible," I said. "This is enough to destroy him professionally and personally," Catherine finished. "To make sure he faces real consequences for his choices. To ensure that he doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed while we pick up the pieces of our broken lives." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I'm tired of being the understanding wife. I'm tired of making excuses for his behavior and pretending everything is fine. I'm tired of protecting a man who clearly has no respect for our marriage or our family." She sat back down, her composure finally cracking just enough to let the truth through. "And because I want him to know what it feels like to lose everything, the way we have." I left Catherine Shaw's house with the manila folder and a new understanding of what real justice might look like. This wasn't just about exposing an affair anymore. This was about dismantling the comfortable life Victor had built on lies and betrayal. But first, I had a more immediate problem to solve. I needed to talk to Beth and Jamie, needed to explain why their family was falling apart, needed to help them understand that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love most. The conversation I'd been dreading since Saturday morning could wait no longer. The girls were waiting for me at Jennifer's sister's house. where they'd been staying since the weekend's explosion. The drive there felt longer than it should have, every mile giving me more time to think and overthink what I was about to say. Lisa had always been the responsible sister, the one who cleaned up messes and asked questions later. When Jennifer was overwhelmed or spiraling, Lisa stepped in without judgment. Her house in the suburbs felt like neutral territory, somewhere we could have difficult conversations without the weight of our destroyed home pressing down on us, without memories in every corner accusing us of what we'd lost. Beth answered the door, 14 years old, and already showing signs of the woman she'd become. She was tall for her age, shoulders a little tense, eyes alert in a way that made it clear she'd been paying attention to far more than the adults realized. She had Jennifer's eyes but my stubborn chin, a combination that had gotten her through middle school social drama and would probably serve her well in whatever came next. Seeing her like that, half child, half something harder, hurt more than anything else so far. "Dad," she said, wrapping me in a hug that felt desperate, tighter than usual. "Mom said you guys are having problems." "We need to talk," I said quietly, holding her for an extra second before letting go. "Where's Jamie?" "Upstairs playing video games with cousin Tyler. She doesn't really understand what's happening." "And you do?" Beth's expression was older than her years, the kind of look you get when innocence has already taken a few hits. "I understand enough. Mom's been acting weird for months. You've been sleeping in the guest room. There was a lot of yelling Saturday morning after Grandma and Grandpa left." Smart kid. Too smart for her own good, maybe. I felt a flash of guilt that she'd had to connect dots no teenager should have to see in the first place. We sat in Lisa's living room. Beth curled up in the corner of the couch like she was trying to make herself smaller, knees pulled up to her chest. The house smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, ordinary things that felt strange against the gravity of what I was about to say. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in my head, practiced gentle phrasing and responsible parent language, but all my prepared words felt inadequate now. "Your mom and I are getting divorced," I said, deciding that direct honesty was better than dancing around the truth or insulting her intelligence. "Because of the other man?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, and for a second I couldn't speak. "What do you know about that?" "I heard you playing something on the kitchen speaker Saturday morning," she said quietly. I was coming downstairs to get breakfast, but I stopped when I heard Mom's voice talking about things she shouldn't have been talking about with someone who wasn't you. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of how badly I'd handled everything. In my anger and need for justice, I'd forgotten that our house wasn't soundproof, that teenage girls were naturally curious, that playing that recording where Beth could hear it was another kind of betrayal entirely, one I hadn't meant, but one that still counted. "I'm sorry you heard that," I said. "That wasn't meant for you." "But it was true?" she asked. "Mom's been cheating on you?" "Yes." Beth was quiet for a long time, staring at the carpet, processing information that no 14-year-old should have to handle. I watched her jaw tighten, watched her grow up another year in the space of a few seconds. "Is that why Grandma and Grandpa left so fast? Why Grandma was crying?" "Your mom made choices that hurt a lot of people," I said carefully. "Your grandparents are disappointed and angry, and they needed time to figure out how to handle that." "Are you angry?" "Furious," I said, deciding that honesty was still the best policy. "But not at you or Jamie, never at you too. This is between your mother and me." She nodded slowly. "What happens now? Where are we going to live? What about school and soccer and everything?" The practical questions were almost harder than the emotional ones. They made everything feel real in a way emotions alone didn't. "We're still working that out. But no matter what happens between your mom and me, you and Jamie are the most important things in my life. That will never change." Jamie appeared in the doorway, 9 years old and clutching a stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 3, one ear permanently bent. "Dad, Aunt Lisa said you were here." I opened my arms and she ran to me, all elbows and knees and fierce hugs. "Hey, baby girl, how are you holding up?" "Mom's been crying a lot," Jamie said matter-of-factly, resting her head against my chest. "She says you're going to live somewhere else for a while." "That's right. Mom and I need some space to figure things out." "Because you had a fight?" "Something like that." She thought about that for a moment. "Will you still come to my soccer games?" "Every single one," I promised without hesitation. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. We talked for another hour, covering logistics and emotions in the chaotic way family conversations always seem to unfold. Beth asked hard questions about divorce and custody, and whether we'd tried counseling. Jamie wanted to know if she could still have sleepovers, and whether we'd still do family movie nights. Sometimes they talked over each other, sometimes they went quiet at the same time, and sometimes we just sat there breathing together. I answered what I could and promised to figure out the rest. What I didn't tell them was that their mother's problems were about to get much worse, and that the comfortable life they'd always known was about to disappear entirely. That evening, I returned to my motel room and spread Catherine Shaw's documents across the small table. Bank statements, credit card records, property documents, hotel receipts. A comprehensive record of Victor Shaw's double life, meticulously documented by a wife who'd learned not to trust her husband's explanations. The Harbor Towers condo was just the beginning. Victor had been spending money on his affairs for over a year. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, jewelry purchases that never made it home to Catherine. The financial trail painted a picture of a man who'd grown comfortable with deception, who assumed no one was watching closely enough to call him out, but the most damaging documents were the ones related to his law firm. Hartwell, Shaw and Associates was in financial trouble, struggling with decreased revenue and increased overhead. Victor had been using firm resources for personal expenses, charging client accounts for meals and travel that had nothing to do with legal work. It was a pattern of ethical violations that could destroy his career and potentially result in criminal charges. I photographed every document, uploaded them to a secure cloud storage account, and began planning my next move. The recording of Jennifer's phone conversation had been personal justice. This was going to be professional destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "The girls said you talked to them today. Thank you for being gentle. We need to discuss custody arrangements soon." I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "We'll discuss it after you discuss your situation with Victor's wife." "What do you mean?" "Check your email in the morning. You'll understand." I spent the next 2 hours crafting an email that would change everything. Not just for Jennifer and Victor, but for everyone whose lives they'd damaged with their selfish choices. The email went to Catherine Shaw, with copies of all Victor's financial records and a detailed timeline of his affair with Jennifer. It went to the managing partner at Hartwell, Shaw and Associates, with documentation of Victor's misuse of firm resources. It went to the State Bar Association with evidence of ethical violations that violated professional conduct standards. And it went to Jennifer with a simple message. Actions have consequences. You're about to learn what those look like. I hit send at 11:47 p.m., exactly 72 hours after Victor Shaw had called my house and destroyed my marriage. Tuesday morning brought chaos. My phone started ringing at 6:30 a.m. Jennifer's name on the caller ID, then Victor's office number, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail and drove to the shop, where Mike was already working on the Mustang's engine. "You look like a man who didn't sleep," he said, without looking up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. "Sleep is for people with clear consciences," I replied. "What did you do, David?" "I made sure that actions have consequences." Mike straightened up, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "That sounds ominous." "It sounds like justice." My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Shaw. "It's done. Victor's been suspended from the firm pending investigation. The Bar Association is opening an ethics inquiry. He came home at noon and found his bags packed on the front porch. Another text, this one from a number I didn't recognize. This is Angela Martinez, reporter with the Herald. I'd like to speak with you about the Shaw investigation. The story was going public. Victor Shaw's comfortable life was unraveling in real time, exactly as I'd planned. Jennifer called again at 2 p.m. This time I answered. "How could you do this?" she said without preamble. "Victor's career is destroyed. The firm is talking about criminal charges. His wife filed for divorce this morning." "Interesting," I said. "It's almost like actions have consequences. This isn't just about Victor. This affects me too. If the firm collapses, I lose my job. If Victor faces criminal charges, I could be implicated as an accomplice." "You should have thought about that before you started planning affairs in our bathroom. David, please. I know I hurt you, but this is bigger than our marriage. This affects Beth and Jamie too. If I lose my job, how am I supposed to support them? The same way I'm going to support them, by working hard and making responsible choices. You remember those, right? Responsible choices? Don't be cruel. Cruel would have been letting you continue your affair while pretending to be a loving wife and mother. Cruel would have been letting Victor destroy other families the way he destroyed ours. This isn't cruelty, Jennifer. This is justice." She was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand that 16 years of marriage meant something. I want you to understand that our children deserved better than having their mother sneak around with her boss. I want you to understand that you don't get to blow up our family and then act like the victim when there are consequences. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen, and now we all have to live with the results." I hung up and went back to work on the Camaro's electrical system. There was something satisfying about fixing things that could actually be repaired, about solving problems that had clear solutions. The afternoon brought more calls from reporters, lawyers, and people I'd never heard of who wanted to discuss the Shaw situation. I ignored them all and focused on the honest work of restoring classic cars. At 5 p.m., Mike locked up the shop, and we walked to Murphy's Tavern across the street. It was the kind of place that served cold beer and didn't ask too many questions, perfect for conversations that needed privacy. "Okay," Mike said after we'd ordered our drinks. "Tell me what you really did." I gave him the full story, Catherine Shaw's documents, the emails to the Bar Association and the managing partner, the systematic destruction of Victor Shaw's professional and personal life. "Jesus, David, you didn't just burn bridges, you napalmed the entire landscape." He had it coming. Maybe he did, but what about Jennifer? What about the girls? Jennifer made her choices. She can live with the consequences. As for Beth and Jamie, they'll be fine. Kids are resilient, and they've got 2 parents who love them, even if those parents can't stand each other right now. And what about you? What happens when the dust settles and you're still angry and alone? It was a good question, one I hadn't really considered. For weeks, maybe longer, my entire mental bandwidth had been consumed by one singular goal, making sure Victor and Jennifer faced consequences for what they'd done. Every thought, every plan, every late-night calculation had been oriented toward exposure, accountability, and justice. I'd been so focused on the reckoning that I hadn't allowed myself to imagine anything beyond it. I hadn't thought much about what came after the consequences, what life looked like when the anger cooled, when the headlines faded, when there was no longer a target to aim at. I realized, uncomfortably, that I'd been running on momentum rather than direction. "I guess I'll figure that out when the time comes," I said. And even to my own ears it sounded like a placeholder answer, something said to buy time rather than express certainty. "Just don't let revenge become your whole life, okay?" he said gently. There was no judgment in his voice, only concern. "You're a good man, David. Don't let their bad choices turn you into someone you won't recognize." The words stayed with me longer than I expected, We finished our drinks in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't demand filling. Two men who'd seen enough of life to understand that justice and healing weren't always the same thing, and that sometimes they arrived on completely different timelines. Wednesday morning brought news that Victor Shaw had been arrested on charges of embezzlement and professional misconduct. I read the headline twice to make sure it was real. The Herald ran a front-page story about the investigation, complete with quotes from anonymous sources, leaked documents, and speculation about how deep the corruption went at Hartwell, Shaw, and Associates. The language was clinical, almost detached, but the implications were devastating. Jennifer's name wasn't mentioned in the article, but anyone who knew about the affair could connect the dots. In professional circles, omission wasn't protection. It was an invitation to speculate. She was guilty by association, her reputation damaged by proximity to Victor's crimes, and I knew that kind of stain didn't wash out easily. I felt a brief flicker of something that might have been regret when I thought about how this would affect Beth and Jamie. They hadn't asked for any of this. They hadn't chosen their mother's decisions or Victor's corruption. But then I remembered the recording. The casual tone, the calculated lies, the way Jennifer had discussed using our children as alibis for her adultery, and whatever softness had surfaced hardened again. Some consequences were harsh, but necessary. My phone rang at noon. Catherine Shaw's name lit up the screen. "It's over," she said when I answered, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been before. "Victor's been formally charged. The firm is dissolving. His legal career is finished." I leaned back against the motel bed, absorbing the finality of it. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," she said honestly. "There's something liberating about finally knowing the truth, about not having to pretend anymore that everything is fine. Pretending takes more energy than people realize." "What's next for you?" "Divorce proceedings, dividing assets, starting over at 46, she said, then let out a quiet breath. "It's terrifying and exciting at the same time." "I'm sorry it came to this." "I'm not," she said firmly, without hesitation. "I'm grateful. You gave me the courage to stop being a victim and start fighting back. Victor thought he could have his affairs and his comfortable life too. He was wrong." I hesitated before asking the next question. "What about Jennifer? Have you heard anything about how she's handling all this?" "Word is she's been suspended from the firm pending the investigation," Catherine said. "They can't afford to keep anyone associated with Victor on the payroll, not with criminal charges pending and the Bar Association breathing down their necks." So, Jennifer had lost her job, just as she'd feared. The news landed with mixed weight. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, a sense of balance being restored. But another part, the part that remembered 16 years of marriage, shared holidays, bedtime stories, and 2 beautiful daughters, felt something far more complicated than triumph. "David?" Catherine's voice pulled me back. "Yeah?" "Thank you," she said, "for having the courage to tell me the truth, for giving me the evidence I needed to fight back, for showing me that I didn't have to accept betrayal as the price of keeping my marriage together." "Thank you for trusting me with your information," I replied, "for helping me make sure Victor faced real consequences." "Partners in justice," she said with a short laugh that carried no humor, only acknowledgement. "Partners in justice," I agreed. After we hung up, I sat in my motel room and tried to process everything that had happened in the past week. The beige walls, the humming air conditioner, the unfamiliar stillness. It all felt temporary, like a waiting room between versions of my life. 7 days ago, I'd been a married man with a family and a predictable routine. Now I was separated, living out of a suitcase, and responsible, directly or indirectly, for destroying 2 careers and ending 2 marriages. The rational part of my brain knew I'd done the right thing. Victor Shaw had been corrupt and unethical, abusing his position to exploit younger women and steal from his clients. Jennifer had betrayed our marriage vows and used our children as cover for her adultery. They had both made choices, and those choices had consequences. But the emotional part of my brain was exhausted. Revenge was sharp and satisfying in the moment, but it didn't fill the empty space where my family used to be. It didn't make me miss Jennifer any less, despite everything she'd done. It didn't make the motel room feel less lonely or the future feel any clearer. Mike had been right about one thing. I couldn't let revenge become my whole life. But I also couldn't pretend that forgiveness was possible. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What I could do, what I had to do, was focus on being the best father possible to Beth and Jamie, on rebuilding some version of a life that made sense without Jennifer in it, on finding a way forward that didn't require anger or hatred to keep me moving. The recording had started this whole chain of events, 43 minutes and 17 seconds of my marriage ending in real time. But recordings could be deleted, phones could be put away, and life, stubborn and relentless, had a way of continuing even after everything you thought you knew had been proven false. The question was, what kind of life did I want to build from the wreckage? I was about to find out. 3 weeks after Victor Shaw's arrest, I was still living in the Riverside Motel, still working on classic cars, and still trying to figure out what came next. The initial satisfaction of watching Jennifer and Victor face consequences had faded, replaced by a grinding exhaustion that seemed to seep into everything I did. The legal proceedings were moving forward with the inevitable momentum of the justice system. Victor's criminal trial was scheduled for early next year. His divorce from Catherine was proceeding smoothly, helped by the mountain of evidence documenting his financial and personal betrayals. Jennifer had hired her own attorney and was trying to distance herself from the scandal, claiming she'd been manipulated and deceived. Maybe she had been. Maybe Victor Shaw was the kind of predator who specialized in exploiting married women going through midlife crises. But that didn't change the fact that she'd made choices, participated willingly, used our children as alibis for adultery. Some betrayals couldn't be explained away, even with the best legal representation. I was working late at the shop, rebuilding the transmission on a 1969 Camaro, when my phone rang. Jennifer's name on the caller ID, the first time she'd called in over a week. "David, we need to talk, in person." About what? About the girls, about custody arrangements, about trying to salvage something from this mess for their sake. I looked at the transmission parts spread across my workbench, the honest mechanical complexity that made sense in ways human relationships never seemed to. When? Tomorrow evening? I could come to the shop after I pick up Beth and Jamie from Lisa's house. Fine, but this is about the girls, nothing else. I understand. She arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, looking tired and older than her 42 years. The stress of the past month had taken its toll, dark circles under her eyes, weight loss that made her clothes hang loosely, an overall fragility that was hard to reconcile with the confident attorney I'd married. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, standing awkwardly in the doorway of the shop. "Like I said, this is about Beth and Jamie." "Right, of course." She looked around the shop, taking in the classic cars in various states of restoration, the tools and parts organized with mechanical precision. "You always loved this place. It's honest work. You fix what's broken, replace what can't be repaired, and when you're done, things actually work better than before." The implication hung in the air between us. Some things could be fixed, others couldn't. "David, I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. The affair, Victor's crimes, the destruction of both our careers. I made terrible choices, but I never wanted to hurt you or the girls. But you did hurt us. Intentionally or not, you destroyed our family for a few hours of feeling alive with your boss. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Sorry doesn't undo the recording, Jennifer. Sorry doesn't erase the image of you planning affairs while our daughters were at soccer practice. Sorry doesn't rebuild 16 years of trust." She was quiet for a moment, tears forming in her eyes. What can I do? How do I make this right? You can't. That's what you don't seem to understand. Some things can't be fixed, can't be forgiven, can't be made right. You can only accept the consequences and try to minimize the damage going forward. Is that what you want? To minimize damage? I want what's best for Beth and Jamie. Everything else is secondary. We spent the next hour working out custody arrangements, dividing holidays and weekends, establishing ground rules for communication and decision-making. It was businesslike and efficient. Two people who'd once planned to grow old together now negotiating the terms of their separation like strangers. There's something else, Jennifer said as we were finishing up. Something you need to know about Victor. What about him? He's not going quietly. He blames you for destroying his life, his career, his marriage. He's been making threats. What kind of threats? Nothing specific. But he's angry and desperate men do stupid things. You should be careful. Victor Shaw is facing criminal charges and professional ruin. I think he has bigger problems than revenge fantasies about me. Maybe. But I know him, David. I know how his mind works. He's not the kind of man who accepts responsibility for his failures. He needs someone to blame, and you're a convenient target. I thought about this for a moment. Victor Shaw had lost everything: his career, his marriage, his reputation, his freedom. Men in his position sometimes lashed out at the people they held responsible for their downfall. I'll be careful, I said finally. Good, because whatever happened between us, I don't want anything to happen to you. The girls need their father. She left shortly after that, driving away in the used Honda she'd bought to replace the BMW that had been repossessed, along with most of her other assets. Jennifer's fall from grace had been almost as dramatic as Victor's, though she'd avoided criminal charges. I finished cleaning up the shop and was locking the front door when I noticed the silver sedan parked across the street. It had been there when Jennifer arrived, which hadn't seemed unusual at the time. But now, an hour later, it was still there. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but something about the car's positioning felt deliberate, like surveillance. I made a mental note to pay attention to my surroundings over the next few days, then drove back to the motel. If Victor Shaw wanted to play games, I was ready for him. The next morning brought confirmation that Jennifer's warning had been justified. I arrived at the shop to find that someone had broken in during the night. Nothing was stolen, but the place had been searched thoroughly. Tools moved, papers scattered, computers accessed. Mike arrived 20 minutes later and surveyed the damage with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen his share of break-ins. Professional job, he said. Whoever did this knew what they were looking for. Any idea what that might have been? Information, financial records, client lists, personal documents, the kind of stuff someone might use for blackmail or intimidation. I thought about the manila folder Catherine Shaw had given me, the documents that had destroyed Victor's career and marriage. Those files were safely stored in a bank safety deposit box, along with copies of the recording and other evidence. But Victor didn't know that. We should call the police, Mike said. And tell them what? That someone broke in but didn't steal anything? That we suspect it might be connected to a criminal case that's already being prosecuted? It's still breaking and entering. It's also a message. Victor Shaw wants me to know he's not done with me. So what do? We upgrade security, install cameras, better locks, maybe an alarm system, and we stay alert. You think he'll try again? I think desperate men do desperate things, and Victor Shaw has nothing left to lose. We spent the morning cleaning up and assessing the damage. The break-in had been thorough but not destructive. Whoever had done it was looking for specific information, not trying to vandalize the place. That afternoon, I drove to the bank and retrieved the documents from my safety deposit box. If Victor was looking for evidence that could implicate him further, he was going to be disappointed. Everything that could destroy his life had already been delivered to the appropriate authorities, but there was one document I'd held back, One piece of evidence that could finish Victor Shaw completely if he pushed me too far. A second recording. The night after I'd captured Jennifer's bathroom conversation, I'd been too angry to sleep. I'd driven past the Harbor Towers condo, parked across the street, and watched Victor's Tesla in the parking garage. At 11:30 p.m., I'd seen him leave the building with a woman who wasn't Jennifer. A younger woman, maybe 25, who worked as a paralegal at his law firm. I'd followed them to a restaurant, then to a hotel, documenting everything with photos and video. Victor Shaw wasn't just having an affair with my wife. He was running a pattern of exploitation that involved multiple women, multiple victims. The paralegal's name was Amanda Chen, and according to the firm's website, she'd been working there for less than a year. Fresh out of law school, probably flattered by the attention of a senior partner, probably unaware that she was just one of several women Victor was manipulating. I'd been saving this information, waiting for the right moment to use it. Victor's break-in at my shop suggested that moment had arrived. I called Catherine Shaw and arranged to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. She arrived looking better than she had in weeks, the stress of uncertainty replaced by the clarity of action. "You look good," I said as she sat down across from me. "I feel good. There's something liberating about finally knowing the truth, about not having to pretend anymore." "How are the divorce proceedings going?" "Smoothly. Victor's legal problems have simplified everything. He's in no position to fight over assets or custody. He just wants it finished so he can focus on staying out of prison." "Speaking of Victor, I think he broke into my shop last night." Catherine's expression darkened. "What was he looking for?" "Evidence, probably. Documents that could implicate him further or give him leverage against me." "Did he find anything?" "No. But it confirms what Jennifer warned me about. Victor's not accepting responsibility for his situation. He's looking for someone to blame, and I'm a convenient target." "What are you going to do?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of Victor with Amanda Chen. "I'm going to remind him that he has bigger problems than revenge fantasies about me." Catherine studied the images, her expression shifting from surprise to disgust. "Another affair? How many women was he manipulating?" "At least 3 that I know of. Jennifer, Amanda Chen, and probably others. Victor Shaw wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was running a systematic pattern of exploitation." "This could destroy what's left of his legal defense?" "That's the idea. If Victor wants to play games, he needs to understand that I still have ammunition he doesn't know about." "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing yet. But if Victor escalates his harassment, if he threatens me or tries to interfere with my relationship with my daughters, I want him to know that I can make his legal problems much worse." "Consider it done." We finished our coffee and parted ways, 2 people who'd found strength in shared betrayal and mutual support. Catherine Shaw had become an unlikely ally, someone who understood the particular pain of discovering that the person you'd trusted most had been systematically deceiving you. There was a quiet solidarity in that realization, a sense that while neither of us would have chosen this path, walking it together made it feel slightly less isolating. We hugged briefly in the parking lot, not as friends exactly, but as survivors acknowledging one another before returning to our separate lives. That evening, I was working late at the shop when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You destroyed my life. Now I'm going to destroy yours." The words sat there on the screen, blunt and unfiltered, the kind of threat sent by someone who no longer had anything left to lose. I felt a flicker of adrenaline, but no real fear, just confirmation that the final stage of Victor Shaw's unraveling had begun. Victor Shaw, apparently done with subtlety. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Catherine, along with a note. "Time to remind Victor about Amanda Chen." It felt strange, weaponizing information this way, but I reminded myself that this wasn't revenge. It was containment. It was drawing a hard boundary and enforcing it. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Victor's voice came through the speaker tight with rage and desperation, the polished confidence he once wielded now completely gone. You think you're so clever, don't you? Recording conversations, gathering evidence, playing detective. But you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Actually, Victor, I think I understand the situation perfectly. You're a corrupt lawyer facing criminal charges who's trying to blame everyone except himself for the consequences of his choices. I had everything: a successful career, a beautiful wife, respect in the community. You took all of that away. No, Victor. You threw all of that away when you decided that professional ethics and marriage vows were optional. I just made sure there were consequences. My voice sounded calmer than I felt, grounded by the simple truth of it. This isn't over. Yes, it is. And if you don't believe me, ask your lawyer about Amanda Chen. Ask him how additional charges of harassment and abuse of power might affect your plea negotiations. The line went quiet for several seconds, the silence heavy and telling. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the paralegal you've been manipulating. The one you took to the Marriott last Tuesday night while you were supposed to be working late on the Henderson case. The one whose career you've been threatening if she doesn't sleep with you. You're bluffing. Am I? Would you like me to send you the photos? Or should I just forward them directly to the district attorney's office? I pictured his face, the dawning realization that his pattern of behavior had finally caught up with him. Another long silence, this one broken by a barely controlled breath. What do you want? I want you to leave me alone. I want you to stop breaking into my shop, stop sending threatening text messages, and stop trying to blame me for the consequences of your own actions. I want you to accept responsibility for destroying both our families and focus on staying out of prison. And if I do that? Then Amanda Chen's story stays private, at least from me. What she decides to do about your harassment is up to her. You bastard. No, Victor. I'm just a man who got tired of letting other people's bad choices go unpunished. Learn from this experience. Accept the consequences of your actions, and leave me and my family alone. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my shop, surrounded by classic cars that represented honest work and straightforward problems. The smell of oil and metal was grounding. Engines either ran or they didn't. Transmissions either shifted smoothly or they needed repair. There was no ambiguity, no deception, no betrayal in mechanical systems, just cause and effect, problem and solution. Unlike human relationships, cars could actually be fixed when they broke down. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Catherine Shaw. Victor just called me, screaming about blackmail and conspiracy. I think your message got through. I texted back, good. Maybe now he'll focus on his legal problems instead of trying to make new ones. What happens next? Next, we all try to build new lives from the wreckage of our old ones. Next, we focus on protecting the people we love from the consequences of other people's selfishness. Next, we learn to live with the truth instead of comfortable lies. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an honest one. And after weeks of deception and betrayal, honesty felt like a luxury I could finally afford. The recording had started this whole chain of events, 43 minutes and 17 seconds of my marriage ending in real time. But the recording was just evidence. The real story was about choices and consequences, about the price of betrayal and the cost of justice. Some things could be fixed, others could only be survived. I was learning the difference.